and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is DebateSensei NPDA Edition, where we talk about things relevant to the National Parliamentary Debate Association. With competitive debate, we have the Assistant Director of Forensics at San Diego State University, Kyle Pryor-Landman, with us. Thank you, Kyle.
Howdy. Thanks, Jared.
So this week, pretty appropriate because last week we talked about some pretty significant rules changes to NPDA, or at least in one of the regions as well as overall. But how is that going to affect preparing for your first tournament? But also maybe what are some of the things that remain as far as preparing to go to your first tournament? So why don't we start with, let's say this is your first tournament ever as a student. You are entered in the novice division for NPDA. You know the times, and the speaking order and stuff like that. But let's think a little bit more strategically. How would you strategize preparing for your first tournament if you are a novice going into your first tournament?
As a judge, the thing I'm looking for the most in novices is structure.
Okay.
Right. I want to see that you are grasping, I'm not looking for high level line by line explicit analysis of specific arguments, right? And I'm not expecting you to spread. I'm not expecting you to go fast. I'm not even expecting you to make complete arguments all of the time. I'm really looking for structure and clash.
Okay.
And I think that to me shows the hallmarks of somebody who is a good debater at heart, just needs to learn the structure a little bit more, is if there's actual clash and not just, I guess the way I put it on my ballots all the time is two ships passing in the night, right?
Right. So in order to be ready for that, I guess that happens at your practice rounds and you're practicing it. So I'm assuming note taking is probably one of the best ways to prepare for your first one, otherwise known as flowing to people in the community. How did you learn it, and or how do you teach it?
I honestly can't recall how I learned it. It was a while ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, the way that I teach it, I think, is probably the same way that I learned it. I mean, I was 19 when I learned it. But the way I teach it is literally, I have one of the senior students show people how to fold the paper, because I'm notoriously bad at origami. But you fold the paper into 6, right? And then that way you have one column for each speech. And then you fold it hot dog, not hamburger.
Hot dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You fold it hot dog into 6 lines. And then you label each one, right? You go PM, LO, MG, MO.
Right.
And then you label each one, and then that way each discrete argument, right? Each advantage, each disadvantage is one sheet of paper, and then each column is each speech, right? So even if you are brand spanking new, you can at least track along with how the arguments are developing in each speech. And so then that way, when you get to the end and you need to give your rebuttal speeches, there's no mystery, right? You've been able to track the development of the arguments. Even if your handwriting's super messy, right? Hopefully you can read your own handwriting. Because Lord knows I can't. But right, I think with the removal of laptop flowing, and I'm sure that's something that's going to proliferate slowly, keeping good flows is key to getting good at debate, right? If you can't figure out what happened in the member speeches or in the block, your PMR is not going to be very good.
Right. So I learned something throughout my life, that I am a way more visual learner than I am a verbal learner. So language for me was, I realized much later in life, was more difficult for me than I saw amongst my classmates and things like that. I failed freshman English in high school, and I was not doing too well in my humanities. The flow sheet was the key for me, because it is, you can see it, so it looks like a grid. And so I do have we do have at Proto Communications, we do have a really good resource that kind of illustrates flowing. So if you want to go to YouTube, you might probably already on YouTube watching this, but if you go to the 2018 NPDA demo debate about minimum wage, we try to show multiple ways on how to flow, and namely like using two different color pens to to do things, as well as doing arrows, keeping things on rows and columns, so you can see how, not just how the whole debate progresses, but how each line of the debate progresses from left to right. And so practice flowing and before your first tournament, and preparing for that. I think that, I don't know, for me, like, I'm always teaching my students every single practice about do better flowing, do better at flowing. Yeah, there you go. There's a pretty good illustration right there as well.
So these are flows from when I first started coaching that I just found inside my desk. Right, like everything's in a column, right? Different colors, different ways of organizing it, right? I mean, I think two different colors and keeping things in columns is probably the hands down best way to start.
Yeah, multiple sheets of paper. I think novices tend to, from my experience, think that they need to get the entire debate round on one side of one sheet of paper. And they start doing things like turning it sideways, doing it landscape, and thinking that that'll do it. And I'm like, no, you got to start recognizing the major sections of a debate, like the affirmative and the negative should be on separate sheets of paper. I mean, they're major strategies, their cases should be on sheets of paper. So you could use that video in order to test your own flowing abilities, like draw it out. Like, honestly, I agree with you. Note taking is key. Absolutely
huge.
So how about, the fact that, so that's one of the rules changes about flowing on a laptop. No longer, is that just PSCFA? Is that just Southern California? Okay. So
it's been a perennial ask at the national level. I think there might finally be enough push to change that at the next business meeting. Again, we'll see.
So maybe one of the first things to do is check your tournament invite about the rules, right? Because NPDA, unlike some other associations, the rules can vary depending on the tournament that you're at, which isn't common for not for CETA, NFALD, or even IPDA. I don't think that there are variations nationwide across the rules, but NPDA does has that. Okay. All right. So check your tournament invite before you go. Make sure you know what's going on. One of the other things that is being removed, at least for PSCFA, is the group prep. Now, as a novice, you wouldn't be familiar with what it was like having group prep. So this might be more about how do you adapt to that? How would you prepare for your first tournament without group prep? What do you think some changes you would make?
This is kind of a difficult question, because I guess it depends on the resources of your school, right? And I think that's kind of like maybe the major question that we're all kind of grappling with, and I don't want to get too deep into that at this point. But I mean, if you have back files and you have access to your Dropbox or your Google Drive, you can use those still, right? And I would encourage you, with the way the rules are now, to continue to use those. If you can probably decently predict like at least some of the topic area, right? Like it's generally, right, something about domestic, generally something about foreign policy, right? You can have generics that kind of fit those expected topic areas. And if you're like completely new to something, I don't think this necessarily changes the dynamic. It just kind of takes away your lifeline, right? If you really don't understand something and you go, okay, well, do you understand this, right? And like And that's like kind of the beauty with NPDA, right? Is at least there's two people to not know something,
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
yeah.
just one person not knowing something.
Yes.
So you can rub your two brain cells together and come up with a with a good enough answer. I think that's probably the only challenge. Just having that kind of crutch removed
Hmm.
um, would be difficult for some people that have never experienced it before. But at the same time, if you're have been doing this for long enough, like you shouldn't be relying on your coach to prep you out entirely, anyways.
Hmm.
At least in a perfect world,
Right.
right? Um, but then maybe it's good, right? Then maybe it's good that we force people to write their own files.
Yeah. There's nothing prohibiting people from using AI during prep, though, is there?
No, use
No.
ChatGPT, use your back files.
Yeah. Okay.
I would caution against taking ChatGPT on its
Oh.
word.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Um,
like any
it's a liar.
hallucinations, yeah, that come up. That you got to be careful about that. It still happens, everybody. Be careful.
I use ChatGPT to help me come up with like topics sometimes and come up with like,
Yeah.
like very basic arguments for stuff I don't understand. But I don't don't trust it. Like, make sure you
Yes.
Google the things that it's saying
Yes.
after it says it, and then it can give you a good starting point. But don't copy your contention straight from ChatGPT.
The strange thing is that probably is good advice even during group prep because
Hmm.
coaches could probably hallucinate too, both literally and sort of in the AI sort of a figurative sense as well.
I am no IR expert.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, you were talking about having certain generic positions. At this time in debate, what are some areas that you think, no matter what, you should be prepared to debate at the first tournament?
Oh, I mean, I'm kind of a hedge hack. I
Okay.
think writing about U.S. domestic or U.S. foreign policy is always something that's at least a position you can run on almost any USFG topic.
Okay.
And that was my own strategy, and that's a strategy I've been coaching my people on forever.
Hmm.
Um, I think that generally, like, the U.S. foreign policy is looking good right now, and U.S. foreign policy is looking bad right now.
Okay.
Are something you should be prepared to talk about. The economy, right, is a pretty low hanging fruit, especially because it's an election year.
Right.
Ticks politics. Your preferred candidate. This causes your preferred candidate to not win. Um,
Okay. Okay.
is is interesting. I don't. People run it. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but people run it. Um, what else?
Well, let's unpack the politics one a
Yeah.
little bit because politics is just for people who don't know is a disadvantage, and um, this is especially helpful when someone is on the affirmative, arguing a case that you might not be very familiar with, right? Any domestic policy, and so the argument generally goes that this is going to cause like political backlash. And what you just pointed out was is more of like the internal link scenario, right? Where it that causes your preferred candidate to not get elected, and then here's the impacts to the wrong person getting elected. Wrong person. All right. How uh, you suggest always having some sort of like every tournament you are updating your politics position?
I think up until the election, or up until, I guess, the person is sworn in,
Yeah.
I would say yes.
Mhm.
I think that it's a very valuable position to hold because it does change all the time, and you can make polling data sound kind of however you want your polling data to sound for your
Right.
uniqueness scenario, right? Because I think that living in a post January 6th world,
Right.
um, we have, like, tick scenarios are more real than ever.
Mhm.
Because for all 200 and something years of U.S. politics, it's been a relatively smooth transition of power. But I mean, I think, like, right wing backlash as an impact scenario, like, has empirics now,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I think that it's not necessarily as unreasonable as it once was to say that backlash from either side is necessarily improbable
Mhm.
in a world where this specific policy option causes the polls to change
Right,
significantly.
right. And so, uh, are there like counter plans that go hand in hand with politics? Is it? I mean, the first one that comes to mind is like states counter plans, and I mean, like I don't know, but it just seems like a safety net argument rather than like that's my diehard strategy that I ride or die on the state's counter plan or anything like
Yeah,
that.
I wouldn't become a Tix team.
Yeah,
I would caution you against pigeonholing yourself into Tix. I think there's much better arguments out there to pigeonhole yourself
yeah,
into. Um, but I think like counter plans, right, is always like you could ban the plan.
okay,
That's been my personal go-to for a lot of plans that would cause ticks. I mean, I also just think a lot of squo good defense
okay,
it like does the job, right? I mean, if you're arguing that this causes the polls to change, the status quo is what the polls are now.
hmm,
So I mean, if you're smartly using your burdens, ticks is like a fantastic squo solves argument.
okay. All right. So, and like going back to like classic stock issues theory for to fall back on when you're
Yeah.
doing a politics event. TICS, short for politics, for
Yeah.
those of you getting caught up with the lingo there. All right. Um, okay, so we have like your elect, but you gotta have like election stuff for your AF and neg, right? Like the or for the not just the neg, like the chances that you're going to have some elections related topic at this time of the year seems pretty high.
So actually, for the Paul Winters tournament in UOP, the topic area is candidate policy positions and
Oh,
electoral procedure.
okay,
So like real tournaments are really making whole topic areas on this.
okay,
So I think that it's important that even at tournaments where there isn't a topic area, like it's an election year, expect the conversation to surround in some way, shape, or form the election, especially this year.
right, and not just like who's going to win, but what policies are front and center in this election. So
Hmm.
things like immigration, reproductive rights, um, like anti-inflation policy. Those are the top three that are popping to mind. Anything else that like what would you add into that as far as this is going?
I mean, I would say foreign policy
Okay, yeah,
also, right? I think that, I mean, I know voters don't care about foreign policy as the old
yeah,
politics adage goes, but debaters do.
yeah.
And, I would expect to talk about all of those things. Maybe, I don't know if there would be a reproductive rights topic.
Mm.
I don't know for a fact. Like, I feel like that might be a topic area topic writers might be concerned giving.
Yeah,
um and so I think again, right, putting yourself in the shoes of the people's writing the topics, right, those are people like me, those are people like you, right,
yeah.
that are actually in the rooms writing the topics. What do college professors write about?
Hmm. And you mentioned that Paul Winters has a topic area. And this kind of goes back to check your tournament invite if there is a topic area,
Hmm.
because not every place has a topic area that lets you get a sort of a rough idea of what you're going to be going for. Okay. Um, now it's okay. My next question is I don't know how to phrase this really, but how do you prepare like your pet cases? Do you have a strategy like those ones that are not likely to be like front and center topics, but if you got the opportunity, you're going to run this? How do you choose what topics to go for? Which ones do you prioritize? What's your go-to for that?
I mean, I'm a hedge hack, right?
Okay, yeah.
Hegemony, right? US hedge. Which is funny because that's just not who I am as a person at all, but I think it's a fantastic argument.
Okay.
um and I look for literally any opportunity to write about US hedge. I will massage the topic to make it fit my needs. Because like that's what I know. right? That's what I'm very comfortable arguing, is what I'm very comfortable talking about, right? International relations and realism. For some way, somehow that ended up being what I want. The way, like, I would say you come about it is, what are you interested in, right? Like,
Mhm.
you should really like sit there and think about it, right? What do I like to debate? What do I want to talk about, right? Because at the end of the day, the debate's about you, right? It's not about what the it is about what the judge wants, right? But debate what you want to debate, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't like some people really hate talking about hedge, and like I get it, it's boring. But like I like it, and that's what I want to talk about. But other people might want to talk about the economy. Other people might want to talk about, feminist critiques, right? Other people might want to talk about Marx, right? Other people want to talk about identity, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
think that there's room to talk about whatever you want and talk about it topically.
Mhm.
Um, you know, just being honest with yourself and not letting your coach dictate what they want to see, right? And I'm not advocating for like, mutiny here,
Right.
but I am advocating for making yourself happy. Like, don't like do argue what you want to talk about.
Mhm. Um, oh, what was I gonna? Okay, I'm interested in knowing what other coaches think about this issue, which is, how much do you want people to do full practice rounds versus some other sort of activity or exercise for debate prep? Where do you fall on that? Are you like, let's get in as many rounds as possible, that's the best prep, or let's do one round and then let's do 3 or 4 exercises?
So I like the idea, like the platonic ideal of doing as many rounds as possible. Just with time constraints, that's not a realistic thing that
Right.
I could ask of my students. Um, and I came from a team where I didn't have another team to debate against. So all I
Mm,
ever did before I went into rounds was drills.
okay.
Um, and I think that I'm very pro drills. I think that drills are probably more useful than debating against your teammates.
Okay.
Um, because at the beginning, right, of the semester, I like to see where everyone's at, right? So I'll have them all debate each other, and then based off of that performance, then we can tailor drills to get you better at the specific things that you're lacking, right?
Mhm.
Unless you're lacking in like its entirety, but I think there's several drills that we can formulate that, one, don't take up as much time as running in a complete round, but you also get better at the specific things you need to get good at.
Mhm. Um, So what are some drills that you like and you would advocate for other people to use?
One of my favorites is kind of so you'll take a round that has been recorded, and this is both for the MG and the MO,
Mhm.
or I guess any speech past the constructive speech.
Okay.
Um, I think that you watch up to the speech that you are about to give, right? So if you're the MG on your team, you watch it up, you watch the PM, you watch the LO, and then
Yeah.
you write your perfect MG, right? The MG that you think would be the best one you could possibly come up with. You write it down, and then you listen to the other person's MG, and then you compare it.
Okay. Okay.
The other way I would do that is force yourself to just give the MG as if you were in that round,
Mm.
and then compare it. That also helps if you have your partner with you. Or like if you're the LOC, right? Listen to the entirety of the PMC, and then listen to all of the on or the off case position of the LO, and then give yourself 2 minutes to give yourself as much offense as you possibly can on the
Okay.
PM, right?
Mhm.
Utilizing those speeches that are online is a huge asset for anybody who wants to do drills.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, even if you're only using them for flowing, I mean, like,
Hmm.
just watch a debate and flow it, even without responding to it, could be a good drill. Again, like, Proto Communications has some of those things for you to use. Go ahead and take a look through our content for that, but god, man, search for other ones. Sometimes, man, I'm always frustrated by the quality, usually the sound quality, and that's difficult. If you're live and you're in person, you could probably catch things, but the microphone quality has not been keeping pace with video quality as far as technology goes.
I would recommend any of the ones from the COVID era of debate. I know a
Oh,
lot of them are pretty fast, but because a lot of them are, quarterfinals and on at,
okay, right.
tournaments. But I would say that there are rounds that exist online that were during the COVID era that have good sound quality, are slow, and that are like beginner friendly.
That's really good. That's really good. Do you happen to know of any like YouTube channels off the top of your head that might have that, or is it really just like NPDA final round 2020?
We're working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working on it. So I know that Brittany Hubble's YouTube channel has a lot of the ones from the COVID era, and
Okay.
then also the forensics tournament. I don't remember if it's under Danny Cantrell's name or under forensics tournament.
Okay. Okay, that's
Um,
good.
those two have a lot of the rounds that were recorded in the PSCFA during COVID,
Very nice.
or
Okay,
like
I'll
any of
check
the
those out.
NPDA tournaments as well.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
sorry, I should say national circuit tournaments.
Okay. Well, that's good advice because now I got to check those out. I got to Brittany Hubble, Danny Cantrell.
Yeah.
Check those out. All right. All right. People who are a little bit more advanced. I remember my transition from junior to open was rough. Like my first few tournaments where people were just pummeling me, especially with critical arguments. I don't know. It seems like that's the last step that I took in my development as a debater, was really understanding how to engage in critical arguments. First off, preparing critical arguments, I don't think is as difficult when you're the one deploying the argument than when you're responding to it. But I kind of want to address both of them. How would you prepare a critique, but also how do you prepare to respond to a critique?
I guess I'm going to start backwards with that,
Yeah,
because
sounds
I
good.
think responding to a critique is way easier than people make it out to be.
Cool.
I think that if you imagine a critique as a linear disad stacked on
Hmm.
top of a counterplan, it becomes a lot easier to answer,
Okay.
right? The first three parts of the critique, right, the framework, the links, and the impacts, are just a disad,
Hmm.
but you're conceding the status quo is bad,
Okay.
right? So treat it like that, right? Treat it like a disad. And then on the solvency level, or on the alternative level, it's also just a counterplan, but the counterplan is not a policy option. It's usually some sort of like mindset shift or
Right.
like endorsement of some ideology, right?
Okay. Okay.
Um, try to find, right, like treat it like a counterplan, right? Perms, disads, right? You can read like defensive arguments to the solvency.
Right.
You could do all of those things. Right, all you are saying though is you're not defending a policy anymore. You're now defending policy making,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
it's a little bit more meta,
Right.
right? But think of all the reasons why policy making is good, and
Right.
then counteract those with a world in which we're taking some sort of like mindset shift.
Hmm.
We can probably still do both.
Yeah, probably. Probably that's where the permutation comes in. That's one of the last things I finally understood about critiques was answering with a perm.
Hmm.
I even had some of my partners; they were kind of like they didn't quite understand it, and they didn't know how to go for it in their member speeches, and so that kind of sucked. So make sure you're on the same page when that
Hmm.
happens. But yeah, it's like you're right. Your language critique is a really good one. We can still have a policy discussion as well as a language discussion, and be consistent about that as well at the same time.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping you from, doing whatever the K asks you to do, and also, passing this bill.
Yeah.
There's nothing. No one's gonna like, rip the policy out of your hands. Um, I think that not getting scared of the big words
Yeah. Yeah.
is the right. All Ks pretty much say the same thing. If you can figure out, right, I won't give you the free coaching. If you could figure out what all the Ks are saying and that the same thing, um, you're on the right track. They all say the same thing, just with different words. But I think going for a K, writing and preparing a K, totally different ballpark.
Yeah.
I think I make all my debaters read the lit base before they read the K. So that way you don't just read things willy-nilly because you think that they're good. You read them because you understand them. And I think that's the most important part. Right? Because debate's an educational activity. You're not just going to talk about Lacan without reading Lacan.
Okay.
Or at least like somebody's interpretation of Lacan.
Right.
And I think that gets you the closest to being able to like really hit the Platonic ideal of K's, right? Where you're no longer just saying things because it's strategically valuable. You're saying things because you understand them. And that prevents the round from getting really, really, really messy.
Yes. All right. So that is about the time, but I did want to give just a really quick mention about one of the easiest things to do is check for judging philosophies on whatever tournament management system you're using. So like, I think they're pretty good about having some sort of judging philosophy there for you to look up, cross-reference which schools are going with the philosophies that are in there, so you can kind of anticipate what's coming out. Do you have any particular way that you advise students to read philosophies or adapt to them? Anything that jumps to mind?
When judges tell you what they don't want, don't do it.
Yes. Okay. I think that is a nice, succinct way to end this particular episode. Kyle, thank you so much for giving us some basics to go over for the first tournament. All right.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So in the future, we're going to be talking about things like final rounds from previous tournaments, doing a deep dive on some of those, and maybe applying some of these concepts. I'll see everyone in the future. Thank you very much.